So we are still working through what is truth, still on number 6, that truth doesn't equal science and science doesn't equal truth. And last week we talked about how if evolution were true, there'd have to be billions and trillions and maybe even more transitional fossils left behind. But like I told you, the problem for evolution is they have not found one. Not one single transitional fossil. And what I also shared with you is that the evolutionists know it and they admit it. So today we're going to move on, continue talking about fossils, and we're going to talk about an area where there is an enormous amount of fraud, misconception, rhetoric, and outright lies found in reference to the fossils that we do have. And I'm going to begin with what is arguably the most scrutinized and debated fossil ever, that being the fossil of Archaeopteryx. And the original fossils of Archaeopteryx all came from the same site in Germany, which was a quarry in the Bavarian region, which is the southern part of Germany. And the most famous fossil, arguably the most famous fossil ever, is this one right here, with Archaeopteryx bent over with his head bent back. So this is an image of this fossil that I'm referring to. And you can see the supposed wings and tail feathers. Okay? This is what for years the evolutionists have claimed represented a transitional form, specifically going from reptiles to birds. This guy right here. But the question is it? Is it really a transitional form? So let's take a look at this guy. First of all, this famous fossil is a limestone impression. The feathers are only visible on the two sides of the limestone impression, which are considered the slab and the counter slab of the fossil. And what it is these two slabs come together like pieces of bread on a sandwich around the fossil. So that's what they have for this thing. And you need to know that fossilized feathers, here we go, we're not working here. Here we go. Fossilized feathers are virtually unknown. So the fact that such remarkable feather impressions were found with this fossil at the precise positions on both the slab and the counter slab is even more remarkable, or what I'd like to say is maybe it's more than remarkable. Maybe it's remarkably unbelievable. And since their discovery, many people have suspected this fossil of being a hoax. And a number of the reasons why are thoroughly outlined in Dr. Walt Brown's book called In the Beginning, which also has detailed photos depicting these reasons. But I'm going to point out a couple of them here. In 1986, X-ray resonance spectrographs were used to analyze this fossil. And the conclusion they had was that the fine-grained material containing the feather impressions differed from the rest of the coarse-grained fossil slab. Furthermore, the fine-grained material containing the feather impressions also differed from the crystalline rock of the quarry in Bavaria where this fossil was supposedly found. So the allegations from this are that thin layers of cement were spread on 2 fossils of the chicken-sized dinosaur Compsognathus. And then chicken feathers were then imprinted in the wet cement. That's what the allegations are from those findings, okay? And since then, the British Museum, which owns the fossils, has refused further testing. Which is kind of odd, wouldn't you think, since they're supposedly a scientific organization. But these tests are not the only problems for this fossil. The skeletal features of Archaeopteryx are unlikely to be suitable for flight, since none of them contain a sternum. And a sternum is necessary for attachment of all the bird's flight muscles. So without a sternum, your breastbone right here, without one of those, we have serious problems for this being a bird. Okay? Then we have the furcula, which we know as the wishbone of Archaeopteryx, is only seen in the British Museum's fossil, none of the others. Plus, that one, the furcula, is suspected of being a forgery in this fossil that I showed you, because it's upside down. And if it were true, it would be the largest furcula of any bird known. Okay? So these are problems with that as well. Not only that, it's shaped more like a boomerang than a wishbone. And on the counter slab, the other piece of bread, right, of the 2 slabs, it shows no evidence of where it would have fit into that other side. If you take a rock and smash it between 2 pieces of bread, when you open that, you'll see its impression on both sides, right? Well, it's not found on one of the slabs, which is a problem. Okay? Double strike impressions, here we go, are also seen with the feathers. And this is indicative of them being moved after they were set in place and the slab and counter slab were pressed together. So other possible issues with forgery. And like I said, in Dr. Walt Brown's book, he goes through this extensively. But the evidence for this transitional fossil hardly supports it actually being one. It actually supports that it's not even an authentic fossil, and rather an elaborate hoax. And even if this fossil was not a hoax, it still would not represent a transitional form, because there are a lot of people who think this fossil is real, but it's just simply a bird. And if you believe this is a genuine fossil, it simply represents a fully formed bird. Okay? In fact, the Hoatzin, I think that's how you say that, which lives along the Amazon River, a bird that's alive today, has very many similarities to Archaeopteryx. Now, people have long claimed that this fossil was a transitional form because it has teeth and it has claws in its wings. And people say that's supposedly features of reptiles and not birds. Okay, that's one of the things that they go to. But did you know that today there are at least 12 species of birds that have claws in their wings? And did you know there are some species of hummingbirds that have teeth? So these features are not unique to reptiles, and there's birds today that have these features. Well, all birds can bite if they want to, right? Plus, Dr. Alan Fiducia, I think that's how you say it, a world authority on birds and an evolutionist himself, has made the following statement regarding Archaeopteryx. Paleontologists have tried to turn Archaeopteryx into an earthbound feathered dinosaur, but it's not. It's a bird, a perching bird. And no amount of paleobabble is going to change that. I had to put that quote in there because of the word paleobabble. I just think that's awesome. And remember, he himself is an evolutionist as well, okay? Another problem with this being a supposedly transitional form is that this animal was dated to 140 to 150 million years ago. Again, that's according to the evolutionist dating system, okay? But still, using their own dating system, fully formed birds existed that were dated to be around 160 to 100 million years ago. Several fossils of the crow-like bird, Confuciusornis, were dated from this same time period. Once again, according to the evolutionist's own dating system. So, how can Archaeopteryx represent a transitional form if fully formed birds already existed during this time period? Or possibly even before Archaeopteryx existed. So either way, genuine or not, this fossil is not a transitional form. In my humble opinion, I believe the data support that it's a hoax. Just like the other one that was supposedly discovered not too long ago. Let me tell you this story. Periodicals like National Geographic in October of 1999 reported that another Archaeopteryx was discovered in China. And they called it a true missing link in the complex chain that connects dinosaurs to birds. However, less than a year later, the truth came out. As USA Today and National Geographic had to report that this fossil was fraudulent, being a composition of a bird's body and a dinosaur's tail. Not even a year went by till they figured that out. Okay? An independent investigator story was reported in National Geographic where they summarized the whole incident with this. This is beautiful. Listen to this. It's a tale of misguided secrecy and misplaced confidence, of rampant egos clashing, self-aggrandizement, wishful thinking, naive assumptions, human error, stubbornness, manipulation, backbiting, lying, corruption, and most of all, abysmal communication. Now that sure sounds like scientists to me. Here's another thing. Even if they would ever find a fossil of a transitional form, you still cannot prove that that fossil had any offspring of his own kind or a different kind. This is a big problem for the fossil record. You cannot prove that a single fossil, no matter what it is, was involved in the propagation and continuation of life. So on top of everything else, to ever claim that a fossil is a transitional form, it's really putting the cart before the horse because you can't prove it had any offspring. You cannot prove it passed on its genetic information, whether it was the same or, according to evolutionists, that it somehow changed. You cannot prove that. All right, so after thoroughly beating up that fossil, let's go to another one. Sinosauropteryx, another supposed transition from reptiles to birds. Here's a photo of one of the fossils and an artist's rendering of what that little guy looked like, okay? However, this fossil has been shown that the feathers are not really feathers. but they represent the same kind of tough elastic strands found on the skin of sharks and reptiles today. So they tried to turn them into feathers, but they're not. Okay? A team led by John Rubin, a respiratory physiology expert at Oregon State University, also concluded that Sinosauropteryx's bellows-like lungs could have never evolved into the high-performance lungs of modern birds. Here's another one. This is a fun word to say, the tiktaalik. Who comes up with these words? I don't know. He's thought to be, by the evolutionists, to be a transitional form between fish and tetrapods.
What is a tetrapod?
Those I'm about to tell you. Set me up perfectly. Four-legged animals, which they think fish evolved into things like amphibians and reptiles. So, okay? That's what they're, I was going to say logic, but that's not logic. So, thought process, so we'll go with that. And they think that because it has fleshy fins that contain bony elements. And here's a picture of their recreation. This is a model that they created of what a tiktaalik looks like, okay? But guess what? There are many species of fish today that can both slither and breathe air. Snakeheads, walking catfish, mud skippers, climbing perch are all examples of such fish. Yet, the evolutionists don't claim that any of these fish are transitions as ancestors of tetrapods. And here's a beautiful one. This is one of my favorites, okay? Evolutionists claim that crossopterygians, like tiktaalik, evolved into tetrapods with fins evolving into limbs. That's the horse they're backing, okay? According to their own time scale, crossopterygians thrived around 380 million years ago. But the last ones went extinct about 80 million years ago. Okay? Here's where this story gets fun. But, yes?
How are they coming up with these millions of years?
Son, that's a whole nother topic in itself, which...
Because human history only goes back
Yes.
so far.
That is their dating system is a whole nother topic of itself. We are going to discuss time a little bit, but like I've told you guys before, we could do this for a year. But we can discuss that further in the small group today. Okay. But none of these fossils had the ability to walk or breathe air. That's the first thing, okay? But here's the problem with this. The damage to this theory was really done when they discovered a crossopterygian very much alive today. That being the fish called the coelacanth. The first one that they recognized was caught in 1938, and there have been many of them caught after that, both in waters off the coast of South Africa and Indonesia. In fact, they've caught dozens that they have now thoroughly studied. And let me show you. Here's a picture of a coelacanth. Scuba diver down there taking some photos. There's a coelacanth right there. Very much still alive today. All right? But here's the problem. Coelacanths were supposed to have gone extinct 380 to 80 million years ago. Imagine the shock to the evolutionists. They did not evolve into land-dwelling tetrapods or go extinct. They're still very much alive today, swimming just like they were supposedly hundreds of millions of years ago. Okay, now that's one thing, but here's the kicker. Not only that, our living coelacanths are exactly the same as their fossils that are supposed to be 380 to 80 million years old. They have not changed one iota. So the question is, how did evolution not happen to these fish when they're supposed to be one of the ancestors of tetrapods? That's the problem if you're an evolutionist. Since studying them, they've been observed to swim upside down, swim backwards, and even swim standing on their heads.
That makes no sense.
But they've never been observed to be walking. That's the problem for the evolutionists. Furthermore, the evolutionists always maintained that coelacanths lived in shallow water because they were preparing to evolve and crawl out of the water onto the land. But these fish have now been shown to not only be bottom dwellers, but they live in some of the deepest parts of the ocean. Whoops, right? They also claim that the fossils showed a primitive lung. But you know what that is? It's actually just a fatty swim bladder, which all fish have, by the way. Nothing to do with a lung. What a shame for the evolutionists. And it kind of makes you feel sorry for them a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But once again, we have rhetoric, deception, and misappropriation of data with this situation. Just like with the Tiktaalik, their bony fins are just that, bony fins. Nothing more, nothing less. Plus, the bones that they have in their fins are dermal bones. They come from the skin and dermis, which is the way it is for all fish. But with tetrapods, their limbs and the attachment girdles, pelvis, shoulders, things like that, they're endochondral bones, which means they develop from ossification, meaning where you have a cartilage matrix that starts it, and then all of that is replaced by true bone. So what I'm getting at here is the type, the development, and the bones involved with fish and tetrapods are completely different. And let me give you a little bit more. So for example, with tetrapods, you have a humerus, an ulna, a radius, carpals, metacarpals in your arms or forelimbs. And then you have a femur, tibia, fibula, tarsals and metatarsals in your legs or rear limbs. Not to mention we have like the pelvis, the shoulders, that all of that gets attached to, which is then anchored to the vertebral column. All of that for a tetrapod. But with fish, even our coelacanth and Tiktaalik, all of that is radically different. They have very small pelvic fins and a small pelvic girdle, and nothing about their design is intended for locomotion on land. They are designed for locomotion through water. They do not have fingers or toes. They do not have all of the robust structures that we have required for the limb attachment and to be able to support our body when we walk on land. So everything about fish is designed to move through water. Everything about tetrapods is designed to support us, our weight, as we walk on land. So, therefore, the bottom line, cross-opterygians like the coelacanth and the Tiktaalik are fish, nothing more, nothing less. Even the discoverers of Tiktaalik admit that these fish have few evolutionary importance as far as similarities to tetrapods are concerned. Okay? Here's another one. Ambulocetus, the supposed missing link from mammals to whales. Here's a photo of a fossil skeleton of Ambulocetus. Okay? What they say is that this was an amphibious creature that could walk as well as swim. But guess what? All animals today that can walk can swim. They try to make this out to be a big deal. It is not. It is nothing unique. Okay? Furthermore, they only found 25% of the bones of this animal. And it did not include a pelvic girdle. They also found the bones in different layers of strata, which the evolutionists will tell you there's millions of years of difference between those layers. Okay? That's what they'll tell you. But in spite of this, they created a full skeleton of it, even with only having 25% of its bones. And said it was a link to whales, even though the whales they put in line with it are 10 times bigger than it is. That's birthing a big baby. Right? Here's another thing. Evolutionists will tell you that the whale's pelvic bones, okay, that's what they call them, are vestigial hips, left over from their evolutionary ancestors. They say that all the time, but guess what? Has nothing to do with that. Those bones are part of a whale's reproductive system. They support the muscles necessary for whales to reproduce. So they have nothing to do with being the hips of a potential ancestor. It's also the same story for snakes. Some snakes have what are called claspers around their anal plates, and those are used for reproduction. But the evolutionists try to tell you those are vestigial hips from their ancestors. But they are not. They have nothing to do with being hips from a potential ancestor. All right, so we've gone through a few of these, but a lot of people will say, what about the cavemen? We've all seen fossils of the cavemen. We've all seen their recreations. So they must be right. Right? 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 So the evolutionists will tell you that primates evolved anywhere from 30 to 15 million years ago, and that humans evolved 125,000 years ago. The question is, did they? What is the actual evidence from the fossils? So let's take a look at some of those. We're going to look at some supposed cavemen or ape men, whatever you want to call them. And we're going to begin with the infamous Piltdown Man. There he is. Piltdown Man was first discovered in 1912 in Piltdown, England. Here's some photos of the skull that they supposedly found, and an artist's recreation of what Mr. Piltdown Man looked like. Okay? This is the kind of stuff you see all the time, right? All right. Let's take a closer look at this guy. But in 1953, Piltdown Man was shown to be an elaborate scam. He was constructed from a human skull, a jaw of an orangutan, and teeth of a chimpanzee. The bones and teeth were filed down to fit together, acid treated, and then buried in a quarry for 2 years before they supposedly dug it up and discovered it. Okay? Since then, At least 11 people have been accused of perpetrating this fraud. And funny, one of them was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. He even got in the list. However, the true perpetrator appears to be Martin A.C. Hinton, who was a worker at the British Museum of Natural History. Let's move on, shall we? Here's Ramapithecus, first hailed as a human ancestor from about 12 million years ago. And here's a photo of an artist's recreation of what Mr. Ramapithecus looked like. Again, this is the kind of stuff you see all the time.
How tall were these trees?
Shorter than we are now, most of them. Okay?
Like the other fellow was like 7 feet tall.
Yeah, most of them, I said. All right. But with this guy, he was constructed from only a handful of teeth and a few jaw fragments by Dr. Louis Leakey, one you've probably heard of. A handful of teeth and a few jaw fragments. And this picture right here is what they made that whole person from, or supposed person, from that. Right there. I'm not making this up, folks. They constructed an entire head and body from that. Funny, huh? But let's continue the story, right? When a complete jaw of Ramapithecus was discovered in 1977, we learned they constructed the fragments incorrectly. What a shock. And Ramapithecus is nothing more than an orangutan. Wow, there's another shock, right? Nothing more than an orangutan. But guess what? Guess what? They renamed it Civipithecus and put it back in the textbooks. And it's still there today. Just to try to disguise it as something else. That people wouldn't recognize that it's already been refuted. And that even though everybody knows it's just an orangutan. This is the kind of stuff they do all the time. Let's look at another one. Nebraska man was supposedly discovered and constructed in 1922. And what this is, the original 1922 artist publication of what Nebraska man looked like. Notice they gave him a club, right? They gave him a wife and everything. Okay?
His mic is set up.
However, this is one of the great ones. However, that entire fella and his wife, by the way, the entire man was constructed from the discovery of only one tooth. And this right here is a picture of the actual tooth. One tooth. Constructed the whole guy, gave him a wife and a club from one tooth. Here's where it gets very entertaining. Because later it was discovered that tooth was actually from an extinct pig. So this photo I show here is the real Nebraska man. A pig.
Exposed.
You know, I've known some people that I would consider pigs, but this is kind of a stretch, don't you think? Again, no such thing as a Nebraska man. Let's move on to another one. Java man was discovered in 1891 by Eugene Dubois. All they found was a femur, 3 teeth, and only part of the skull. There is a picture of what they found. But guess what? Once again, they put an entire person together from that. And here's a picture of their reconstruction of what Java man looked like. See, they put these together, they put images, they do the, what are they, clay or whatever that they make and put them in the museums and everything, and you look at it and say, wow, look how real he looks, right? Simply an artist's recreation. From only a few bones. They created this entire dude. But here, the skull and leg bone were found 40 feet apart in an area that also had true human remains mixed in with it. Some 40 years later, at the end of his life, Dubois admitted to these facts and stated that the remains were not of an ape man, they were that of a large gibbon, a monkey. He also admitted to withholding parts of 4 other thigh bones of apes that he had found there. So he figured out they knew what it was, and he held all the information back. Here's what he wrote. Pithecanthropus was not a man, but a gigantic genus allied to the gibbons, superior to its native relatives on account of his exceedingly large brain volume, and distinguished at the same time by its erect attitude. He deliberately deceived everybody. Here's another one. Oh, I went too far. Australopithecus. Arguably the most famous of all the supposed ape men. And you most likely have heard of her going by the name Lucy. Lucy was made famous by Dr. Lewis and Mary Leakey, although they didn't discover the fossil. It was discovered by Donald Johanson in Ethiopia in 1974. Here's a picture of what they found of Lucy. Here's the skeleton. What you'll notice is it's quite incomplete. That's what they have of it right here. This is a picture of what they found. And here's an artist's recreation from this of what Lucy looked like.
What the heck?
Isn't she adorable? Right? Here. They constructed a full skeleton of Lucy without a skull, hands, lower leg bones, or feet.
I didn't they just do I guess.
Lucy was considered to be a human missing link because of her size. She was only 3.5 feet tall. And the fact that the femur had to angle to meet the knee. But guess what? All tree-dwelling apes have angled femurs. There's nothing unique about that. Plus, in 1987, anatomist Dr. Charles Oxnard, professor of anatomy and human biology at the University of Western Australia, concluded that the detailed computer studies he performed showed that Australopithecus is not intermediate between men and apes. Oxnard concluded this. Indeed, more different from both African apes and humans in most features than these latter are from each other. Part of the basis of this acceptance has been the fact that even opposing investigators have found these large differences as they too use techniques and research designs that were less biased by prior notions as to what the fossils might have been. And he also wrote this. The new investigations suggest that the fossil fragments are usually uniquely different from any living form. He's saying it's just a unique species of ape. That's what he's saying. Not a pre-human. CAT scans of Australopithecus's inner ears, which are used for posture and balance, okay? By anatomist Dr. Fred Spoor and colleagues at the University College in London, revealed that these guys did not walk habitually upright, but rather as a chimpanzee or gorilla. Australopithecus did not walk upright and was therefore likely an extinct ape that swung from trees and was similar to pygmy chimpanzees. Yes?
What does the inside of your ears have to do with standing up? So what does that have to do with it exactly?
Because we can talk about this in the small group, okay? Remind me to come back to that. One of these that you alluded to before, Neanderthal man. There he is. He's a handsome fellow, isn't he? Right? Was once considered a primitive man and a subhuman. That's a picture of one of the guys from a museum, the recreation of them, right? Okay? But it has since been discovered that the features that led evolutionists to mistakenly believe that Neanderthals were primitive have now been clarified to be the result of nutritional deficiencies and pathological conditions. For example, rickets and arthritis. X-ray analysis suggests that Neanderthals were people who matured slower and lived longer than people of today. And ladies and gentlemen, that is a topic we're going to get into in one of the next discussions when we talk about time. About people maturing slower and living longer. Their brains were actually larger than that of modern man too. They buried their dead similar to the way that we do today. They made and used complex stone tools and axes. They hunted and butchered mammoths and other big game. So the conclusion is Neanderthal was completely human, just like Cro-Magnon man and Heidelberg man, which were talented artists and ivory sculptors. All of them completely human. Okay? Here's another one. Tomei man. He was originally hailed as the oldest hominid. And here's a picture of Tomei man's skull. Okay? But in 2002, Nature reported it's just an ancient ape. They knew it was an ape. But they waited until it was in the textbooks as Tomei man to come out with this report. Deliberately trying to deceive people. Again. Like I said, sure sounds like scientists to me. How about this one? Flat-faced man. I didn't make these up, folks. This was a reconstruction of a skull that was smashed into some 50 pieces. Okay? This reconstruction was done by Dr. Meave Leakey in 1999. So there's a picture of that skull after she supposedly put all the 50 pieces back together. After putting all the pieces together, she claimed that the skull was slightly flatter than that of an ape's face. So that just begs the question, how did she know how all the pieces went together in 3D? Right? How did she know how they went together? But later on, it was determined that once again, this is not a missing link. It's just another ape. So she digs something up she's never seen before in 50 pieces and say, oh, this is how it goes. Right? Preconceived notions and bias and what went in there. On top of these cases, evolutionists also conveniently ignore the remains of modern humans that have been found in layers of rock that are, according to their own dating system, that are older than the time period that they say man evolved. Let me give you two examples of this. Rex skeleton, found in 1913, Tanzania, in strata that's supposedly 1.15 to 1.7 million years old, according to their dating system. Modern human skeletons. That's a problem. Here's some more. The Castanedolo skeletons, found in Italy in 1860, in layers of rock supposedly belonging to the Pliocene epoch, which is supposedly somewhere between 2.5 and 5.3 million years old. Again, according to their own dating system. But here's the problem, folks. If you remember, humans weren't supposed to have evolved until 125,000 years ago. That's where you got to say, whoops. But now they're finding him in layers of rock that's supposedly several million years old. Noted anthropologist Dr. Edmund Ronald Leach stated this: missing links in the sequence of fossil evidence were a worry to Darwin. He felt sure they would eventually turn up, but they are still missing and seem likely to remain so. Evolutionists have spent about 150 years looking for these supposed missing links, and they haven't found anything even closely resembling one. The so-called missing links are indeed that, missing because they don't exist. So I'm going to hijack the terminology found in Hebrews 11:1 and say that for the evolutionist, faith is the substance of fossils hoped for and the evidence of links unseen. Now, I have heard this was originally spoken by Dr. Dwayne Gish, and I looked for a reference to that. I could not find one. However, I'm just going to point that out, that it may have been something that he came up with. Regardless, I just think this is awesome. The substance of fossils hoped for and the evidence of links unseen. Now, remember what I said. If evolution were true and a gradual change is going on here, there would have to be billions and trillions of transitional fossils left behind, if not more. There would have to be so many that we would literally be tripping over them. But they haven't found a single one. I would say that causes a cavernous-sized hole in the theory of evolution. And hopefully you guys see that now too. But what is an abomination is that these so-called examples of missing links and this so-called evidence of evolution continues to be taught unopposed as factual in our schools, colleges, and universities. And I'm hoping that that statement gets your blood pressure up a little bit, because it should. It's accepted and propagated by the media as well, even knowing that none of it is factual. There is simply no evidence of evolution in the fossil records. None. However, I would say the fossil records do show us one thing that is factual, and I'm going to end with this today. The fossil record shows us that countless humans have evolved into fools and idiots. That's the one thing that I would say that we have found. So that's where we're going to end today. And we're going to move on next week. And we're going to talk about, I told you, a couple more things. We're going to talk about dinosaurs, because you can't talk about this without talking about dinosaurs, right? and other living fossils. That's what we're going to move to next. Combine that all with the element of time. So that'll do it for today.